In 1966, in the town of Palma de Mallorca, the 7-time Spanish champion Antonia Medina Garcia, who had the white pieces, took part in an epic battle against the legendary world champion Mikhail Tal. The Soviet-Latvian player, who was well known for his incredible sacrifices, had the black pieces. The game started with the can variation of the Sicilian defence. After what was a very tactical middle game, Mikhail Tal won the endgame in an astonishing way. And this is what we are going to find out in this episode of Wednesday Chess Puzzle. Hello Chessgamologists, welcome to Wednesday Chess Puzzle, where you and I put our brains to work to solve an interesting problem. This is the position, black to move. What would you play? What you can do is pause the video, have a think about it, and then come back for the solution. Okay, welcome back. Before I give you the answer, here's a clue for you. In the game, Tal managed to create what is called an unstoppable passed pawn. This is an example of what an unstoppable passed pawn is. The pawn on h3 is a passed pawn because it is a pawn with no opposing pawns to prevent it from advancing to the 8th rank. It can go to the 8th rank, well in this case the 1st rank, as it's the black pieces, to promote to a queen. And secondly, it's unstoppable because in this case it's black to move, so black will simply play pawn to h2, and you can see that the pawn on h2 controls the g1 square, the bishop on f3 controls the g2 square, therefore the king on f2 cannot come and grab the pawn on h2, it cannot stop it from queening. Now then, let's have a look at some of the flabbergasting calculations Mikhail Tal went through to win the game. What he understood is that he was going to be able to create a passed pawn. This passed pawn will be h3, and he also knew that it would become an unstoppable pawn and that he would be able to make a queen on h1, promote to a queen on h1. The first little sequence is based on 3 or 4 forced moves. So it starts off with queen to b1, check. The pawn on h3 controls the g2 square, so the king has to go to f2. The next move, queen to h1, protecting the knight and threatening to grab the pawn on h2. So, what can white do in this position? It is quite clear that white can't stop black from taking on h2. So white needs to come up maybe with other ideas to try and stop this. Perhaps white could try and create a bishop and queen lineup, just like the one we saw in a previous Wednesday chess puzzle, threatening mate on g7. If white were to play this, well, black could take on h2, the king could drop back to f1, then black would play queen to g2, the king would have to move, black would take now on g3, protecting the g7 square, the king would have to move once again. Well, if the king moves here, we now simply take, and that's going to be a win, an easy win for black, because there's the extra piece and plus this pawn can go to h1. So this line with bishop on c3 doesn't work. We can have a look at another move, and that would be queen to c5. The idea would be for white to try and get a draw by doing perpetual checks. Let's have a look. If black were a bit careless and played knight to f6, well, white could play queen to c8. The king is check. The king has to move to h7. White would then grab the pawn on h3. The king would drop back to g8, and this would be a draw by doing perpetual checks. The queen would go back and forth, and if the king were to move somewhere else to g6, for example, well, that could actually be quite dangerous, because after f5 the only move available for the black king is g5, and in this case bishop to d2 would be checkmate. The bishop controlling the diagonal, the queen controlling d squares, and the pawn controlling that square. So if black is a bit careless and plays knight to f6, it could either be a perpetual check, which would lead to a draw, or it could even be checkmate. But Tal in this position was not careless. Oh, sorry, that was not actually the game, but if he were to play this position, he would not have been careless, and he would have simply played queen takes on h2, check. The king has to move. Queen check. The king has to move once again. Queen takes g3, check. The king has to move once again. And once the queen gets to g2, the knight is protected, and the pawn is protected on h3, so it won't be possible for white to do these perpetual check patterns. So just like bishop on c3, this queen to c5 move doesn't work either. We are now going to have a look at the line that was actually played in the game. Medina Garcia played king to e2, queen takes on h2, queen drops back to f2 to protect this pawn, queen to h1, queen to f3, attacking the knight, so the queen has to take. And now, this is the brilliant move that Tal saw 7 or 8 moves ahead, and this move is knight to e3. Quite an astonishing move. If king takes the knight, well, the pawn would simply promote to h1 and become a queen. And if white does not take the knight and tries and prevent the pawn from going to h1, well, that will not be possible because the knight is controlling the square on g2. So black would play h2, protecting the g1 square, the knight protects the g2 square, king has to move, and that will be queen, and that's the end of the game. If you want to see more weekly and monthly videos, you can subscribe to the Chessgamology channel by clicking on the subscribe button. And you can also check out some of my other videos. Have a nice day, see you next time, goodbye.